Is Deion Sanders the most hated on coach in college football? We'll talk about that and more on today's episode of Locked On Buffs.
You are Locked On Buffs, your daily podcast on the Colorado Buffaloes. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What is up, everybody? This is Locked On Buffs. I'm your host, Kevin Borba, and joining me today again is John Garcia Jr. John, welcome back. I'm happy to have you. Today we're talking, is Coach Prime the most criticized coach in football? We're going to be talking about a Buff who earned their number, the first on the team and first and only as of right now. And then we're going to talk about a major recruit, including Colorado and his top six, despite having like 100,000 offers from programs all over the country. So before we dive in, I want to thank you guys for making Locked On Buffs your first listen of the day. Make sure to check us out, Spotify, YouTube, wherever you get your podcasts. John, let's dive right in. So let me give you some context to why I'm discussing whether Coach Prime is the most criticized coach in football. I think every time we discuss anything past year two with Coach Prime, people either say he's going to be fired by then, because they think he's going to fail as a coach, or they think he's going to succeed, which is a good thing for the Buffs. But the second part's a bad thing. They think he's going to succeed and leave immediately for the next available job. So I was just wondering, why do you think that is? I think he's heavily scrutinized for everything he says, in terms of his philosophies, the way he kind of built his roster, and just his all-around outspokenness. So John, kind of give us an insight on why that is.
Well, like you said, he creates a bit of a polarization, and I think it's easy to latch on to any one of those preconceived notions and kind of run with it. Obviously, he was at Jackson State for 3 years, and it springboarded him into the Power Five. So on one end, there's a thought that Colorado will be the next springboard, but he's got to settle in first. I mean, this is something that is still so new that I think that part of the conversation, it's all TBD. I think just like any professional navigating through any climate, you're digging into your current job, and then you kind of take things as they come. It doesn't mean you're going to jump at the first chance to leave, or you're waiting on one gig or whatever it is. We don't know, and I believe that changes for a lot of coaches, probably year to year, if not less frequent. In terms of just when you're available to maybe make another move. But I think on the other side of the polarization, look, Prime wants to prove people wrong. All of this access, all of these windows into what's going on in Boulder, basically hour by hour, if not day by day, it invites, more detractors, more haters, as you said. So I think on the other side of it, it creates that desire to make it work there at Colorado, which is why the second criticism really doesn't make sense to me. He'll be in and out in 2 years, whether it's because he's so successful or because it's so bad. Let's look at the investment that Colorado has made on Prime. I think we're all viewing this from Prime's perspective as the commodity, but he's viewing Colorado as the commodity. And this program, university, administration, the city, everyone has invested in him, vice versa. So I do think that there's some desire to not only prove people wrong on the outside looking in, but some desire to satisfy that investment, that massive investment that everybody in and around the program has put on Sanders, and not to mention these coaches, right? I do think we casually talk about the coaching carousel and say, yeah, this guy's going to bold and go here and go there and all that stuff. But when you bring in this type of coaching staff with head coaching pedigree, with a lot of Power Five pedigree, it creates a little bit more of a stable situation on the front end, because you're not going to ask those guys to move across the country, in most cases west to Boulder, to then in 18 months say, hey, sorry, we're taking another gig. Good luck with your next step. Because those conversations came up when you're bringing in a Sean Lewis or a Charles Kelly or a Tim Brewster or whoever it is. You knew those conversations absolutely came up, and that's part of the reason why these coaches have also bought into Prime just as much as recruits and fans and the administration all together. So I do think that it's just early for all of those conversations. I don't think any coach has such a narrow plan to jump forward and move forward into something like that relative to another gig. And let's also be honest, if it doesn't quite work out in the next 2 years, I don't think he's going to have a short hook from the Colorado perspective. I think the buzz is buying him extra time, if anything, to make things right in Boulder.
Yeah, I totally agree. And I think the thing that we kind of gloss over is the fact that Coach Prime had other offers and he picked Colorado. That's for one. Two, I think people forget about the human element of coaching. Sometimes coaches just like where they're at, and it appears based on the first few. I guess he's been there for 4 or 5 months now, since like December-ish, that he really likes to be in Colorado. He's kind of made himself a part of the community. I feel like every other day he's like tweeting like a general question, like, "Hey, where can I buy the best ATVs in Colorado? Where can I get the best food?" And so I feel like he's really embraced Boulder, and I think that while I don't know if he ever imagined in his head when he was younger, a younger coach, I guess you could say, even though he's only been doing it for 3 years, that Boulder would be his final destination because he loved it so much. I do think that's a realistic possibility for him. I think in a conference like the Pac-12, who, assuming they don't implode and they could get some sort of a semblance of a deal in, there's not going to be, outside of Oregon and Washington, there's going to be a constant opening for a winning team. You're in a Power Five. I also think people forget that in college sports, the biggest programs are not in like the Los Angeles market outside of USC or I guess Austin, Texas. But outside of that, a lot of the biggest programs are not in like these huge major markets. It's not like the NBA where it's like I want to play in LA, or I want to play in New York, or I want to coach in LA and New York. It's
And
like
he's done all that.
yeah, and the biggest program is in Tuscaloosa, Alabama. Like Tuscaloosa, before outside of football, I don't think there's much attraction to Tuscaloosa, Alabama. No offense to the Tuscaloosans out there, but I'm just saying, like, I think people are trying to factor in so many things that we can't even fathom yet because we haven't seen him coach a game. And two, I think people are trying to make something where it's not. Like, I really think people just want to, and Colorado is like has been the epitome of this, is they don't like a program like Colorado getting this attention, and so they instantly have to find ways to be like it's gonna disappear in seconds, so don't get too excited. And I think people just don't like the new blood of Colorado.
That's a great point. I think that's probably the best point we've made today because, yeah, the buzz creates natural detractors. So imagine being any other program in that conference that was better than Colorado last year and years prior, saying, hey, you know, they're getting all the buzz, all the momentum without maybe having earned it on the field. Of course, that's out of everyone's control because of this thing called time and the calendar. But yeah, I understand that it creates a little bit of jealousy. You know, that is absolutely a part of this conversation. And say one thing about, college football coaches, they get very jealous. I mean, it's just something that comes up so much, whether you look at the top all the way on down. When Texas A&M had the number one recruiting class, it was Nick Saban and Lane Kiffin kind of taking shots at Jimbo Fisher there. But this past year, Alabama had the number one class. Guess what? Saban was kind of quiet about it thereafter. So there's always sort of this desire to capture some of the momentum, and the methods to which Prime has done it is obviously more unconventional and more modern compared to the Sabans and the Fishers and the Kirby Smarts that have the rings on their fingers. So I do think that is a huge part of the conversation.
Yeah, I think one final point before we move on to our next topic is I think Coach Prime just embraced the modern college football quicker than most coaches have or would. It reminds me of, to cross over back to basketball, when Coach Cal at Kentucky started embracing the one and dones, and then Duke started embracing the one and dones. It's like we want these top guys, and we know we're going to get them for half the calendar year, and then they're gone. And so I think Coach Prime has embraced the equivalent of college football's one and done and the transfer portal, and just doing what you got to do in the NIL situations to kind of bring in these bigger names. Guys, the NBA playoffs are almost here. They're a couple weeks away, and now is the perfect time to download FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook, because new customers get a no-sweat first bet up to $1,000. That's bonus bets back if your first bet doesn't win. Just download the FanDuel Sportsbook app. It's safe, secure, and super easy to use. Then you can bet on everything from money line to point scores and threes drained. Plus, FanDuel even lets you combine your bets for a chance at a bigger payout with the same game parlay. So don't miss a chance to get your no sweat first bet up to $1,000 in bonus bets when you go to fanduel.com/lockedon. That is fanduel.com/lockedon to learn more. Make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sports betting partner of the NBA. Okay, we obviously just discussed why Coach Prime is one of the most criticized coaches in football, I guess you could say, in all of football. One of the reasons he was most recently criticized was his stance on jersey numbers. Usually in the modern college football, a player is recruited. They kind of imply to a coach, hey, I want number 3. We'll say, for example, they get on the campus. Obviously, if there's not a better or more veteran player with number 3 is all theirs. And it's as simple as that. They'll be sporting number 3 in spring practice the next month or so when they get on and enroll early. However, Coach Prime and Matt Rule at Nebraska, as we recently learned, have a policy where no one has a number in practice and everybody must earn their number. And so while as media members, it's hard to watch practice and kind of determine who is who based off of just their name being written on their helmet on a piece of tape. It does give everybody a sense of responsibility and a sense of motivation. And so nobody had earned their number yet. And Coach Prime had made it known that single digits were for the guys. So not everyone gets to don the single digit, unfortunately. So if you're a walk-on type guy who's not going to play, you will not be wearing number 1. He made it very clear that he wants his best players wearing the numbers that they want to wear, and nobody will be wearing number 0, which I thought was interesting because we just talked about him being so modern, but he hates the number 0. But Colorado has had their first person earn their number, and it was none other than Mr. Jimmy Horn Jr., the USF transfer. John, can you explain? Because obviously we have talked about him multiple times being a standout, being a guy who's emerged. Can you talk about a little why he's probably the first one to earn his number?
I think Jimmy's done obviously a great job of what we have expected, right? The willingness to go out there and play all over the place, multiple wide receiver positions, of course, factoring into the return game in the punt and kick department as well. But I look at this quote from Nick Williams, who's one of the defensive assistants there at CU, and all he talked about was Jimmy's effort. So I think that's both ends of the spectrum right there, right? We knew he's got this freaky athletic pedigree, maybe the fastest player on the roster, probably the quickest, if not the fastest. And all of this talent, polish as a route runner, as a wide receiver, as a return man. But when it starts to combine with effort in setting examples, setting the pace in practice, as everyone is trying to make their name and, in this case, their number, I think when all of that combines, you start to see a leader emerging. So there is where it's not a surprise once you learn that the effort and the hard work has matched the natural talent and the polished talent. Then you start to become less surprised that Horn was first up in the number department. And coming from a defensive coach, obviously, it hits a little bit harder, right? Because you're going against Jimmy every single day. And I think that's where you start to really feel the praise and again some potential leadership qualities that are clearly emerging from Horn. So he was sort of the early camp standout athletically, and now the coaches, the decision makers, are letting us know that it's not just the natural God-given gifts, it's the effort. It's what's in between his ears that is now accelerating a lot of that process. So once something like that comes together, you understand why he is quite literally, in this case, example 1 in terms of what this coaching staff is looking for. So quite fitting, a guy who came in with a lot of expectations, which is kind of a theme here at Colorado these days, but who has also lived up to it very early in that process from basically all angles, as far as we can tell. So I think that's a great way to start for Colorado. And like you said earlier, KB, it's a motivational point. You know, goal setting is such a big part of just growing up, right? I mean, some people view it short-sighted, like, hey, I got bills to pay, so I got to make this much money so I can pay these bills. But I think when you expand on some of those things, you know, getting tasks done, being goal-oriented are usually very positive moments in your life and habits to go forward with. So even if it seems silly to some of our audience with this whole numbers thing, you're seeing it being celebrated immediately when the first one comes off the board. So imagine as 2, 3, 4, 5 go all the way up to 100 on this roster, as they get over that same hump, how much that can matter, because you're creating that, and that's a part of culture development and trying to build something that again is really against the grain here. There's not a lot of expectation right now, even with this more talented roster than we've seen over the last few years. So any element towards cultural development is something you've got to really, stand hard on. And obviously this coaching staff and now the players have bought into that, at least in this example.
Yeah, I think like some programs they earn their like Ohio State earns their red stripe. They all have black stripes.
Yeah.
Some programs earn their helmet sticker, whatever it may be. But I think a jersey number is a little more personal. A lot of these guys, we saw when Jimmy Horn got his number, they immediately posted a video of why it meant so much to him. And so I think for a lot of these guys, every number, their number that they choose to wear has a meaning to them. And I also think, and this is probably the more pessimistic looking at it, I guess. Jimmy Horn has a chance to kind of cement himself as the team's leader at receiver right now, because Xavier Weaver, his running mate from USF, who was one of USF's all-time leading receivers, is coming eventually. There's a possibility that Shane Hooks from Jackson State, who was Shedeur Sanders' favorite target at Jackson State, will also be in the fray if he commits to Colorado. And so I think not only is it showing his effort level, his determination and all that, but it's showing that he knows that, and we've talked about it multiple times, in the Sean Lewis offense, there's room for 3 or 4 pass catchers to be the guys. If you're not in that main 3 or 4, you kind of fall out of the heavy rotation. And so I think in a way, this is Jimmy Horn proving that he's one of the best receivers on the roster. And regardless of who's there, when they get there, that he wants to be one of the guys, because we've talked about it multiple times. It's Jimmy Horn. Travis Hunter has been getting a lot of praise at wide receiver during spring already. And so that's kind of already a pseudo spot taken. So then you got Seydou Traore. That's another spot. That's 3. And we kind of limit it to 4 in the Sean Lewis offense, just based off of trends. And so everybody's fighting for that 1 or 2 final spots. And so it's getting really intense. And I think while you don't win position battles in spring, you could certainly position yourself to be ahead in the fall.
And I like that you brought up the personalized angle with the numbers, because Jimmy Horn's been rocking 5 since high school, right? So 5 in high school, 5 at USF. When he was in the portal taking all the visits, he was wearing number 5 and all of the, jersey shoots with Texas A&M and Houston, and obviously at Colorado there as well. So it means something to him. It's even, in his Twitter bio or Twitter profile or handle, his Twitter is Too Swift J5. J5 is like his nickname. So you talk about personal. This is something that it's not quite Deion Sanders or number 2, but it is something that Jimmy has attached to himself for several years now. So you understand why, again, this is kind of the perfect player to lift up in this example, because it clearly meant a lot to him from the beginning of the process. And now obviously Colorado can celebrate it and motivate the rest of the guys at the same time.
Yeah. And I will say, I'm surprised that if I was a betting man and I had to place money on who would earn their jersey number first, my money would have gone to possibly the quarterback or possibly that two-way player that we frequently mention, Travis Hunter.
I would have guessed Hunter. I think Shedeur is going to have his own kind of father-son bubble where things are slower, at least publicly, with him, again, to use as a bit of an example, because I think that would be the low-hanging fruit if it was Sanders, and then it brings a whole nother layer of criticism in that regard. So I think he'll slow play some Shedeur stuff, at least on the front end.
That's true. That's a good point. Guys, thank you for making Locked On Buffs your first listen today. For your second listen, check out our brand new podcast, Locked On College Basketball. Experts Isaac Shaw and Andy Patton bring you everything you need to know on and off the court, plus hear from big name experts, coaches, and players throughout the basketball landscape. Locked On College Basketball, available on YouTube and wherever you get your podcast. The season may be done, but the transfer portal never sleeps. There are thousands of players in the portal in basketball, so go check them out. They have a lot to talk about. We have a lot to talk about here recruiting-wise, just because Colorado has been named as one of the top 6 schools for Kylan Fox, who is a 4-star tight end / edge rusher who projects as a tight end for most programs, has nearly 60 offers, probably over 60 offers by now, and he's narrowed it down to 6. He's one of the most recruited players in the country. Not even some of the 5-stars have as many offers as he does. He's just an all-around great athlete. And John, you kind of broke down his game and why he makes sense for Colorado. So take it away.
Yeah, Kylan Fox, one of the January visitors out to Boulder, has really been busy on the visit trail. And it turned out the last 5 or 6 schools that he visited, ended up being the top 6 schools. So Kylan was a little bit of one step ahead of the recruiting industry here. And yeah, he chopped that list to 6 schools. Colorado joined by a bunch of schools closer to home for Kylan. He's a kid out of Grayson High School in Loganville, Georgia, north of Atlanta, big time powerhouse program in the state of Georgia. And I would say well beyond. And a lot of the schools are in that sort of SEC, ACC footprint. Yeah, you've got Georgia Tech, Ole Miss, Miami, UCF, Florida State among those schools in the mix. And then there's Colorado. So again, I do think this is another example of just how much contention this program and Prime and the buzz is really going to create. Because without the buzz, a kid with 60 offers isn't going to go out and see Colorado. He's got plenty on his plate, but yet and still got out there in January, loved it. And Kylan, told me himself, hey, it's about Prime. It's about that type of ceiling and the momentum there, the eyeballs that will be on me, Kylan in this case, if I do select a school like Colorado. So, of course, as you mentioned, Kevin, 6'4", 220, tight end, defensive end, plays both ways for a big-time program in the state of Georgia. So, naturally, this is a hotly contested recruitment, and he's well-traveled, as we mentioned. So, I think the next step for Colorado here is to grab another visit. Probably an official at this point. He set 3, all in the state of Florida, to those 3 finalists in the state. Again, Miami, UCF, and FSU among those 3. So that means he's got 2 official visits left. I think Colorado has to try to campaign to grab one of those official visits, because while he's been busy lately with these unofficials, he's frequented some of these campuses before, particularly Georgia Tech, which is closest to home. So Colorado's going to have to continue to make a physical impression on Fox. But from the head coaching perspective, this is the most unique offer among these final 6 options that Fox has. And look, let's not over or undersell Tim Brewster and Sean Lewis and their potential impact on this. Because if Fox is going to play tight end in Boulder, like most schools think he'll play at the next level, that's the group that has to sort of solidify things, in addition to Coach Prime as the guy who maybe got him interested and the guy who'll have to close at the end of the cycle. In between, Lewis, the OC, Brewster, the tight ends coach, really have to do their part as well. And both of them are very well versed in Fox and a lot of prospects in that southern footprint as well. So I think this is more of a puncher's chance, more than a puncher's chance for Colorado in this recruitment. And Fox can go. He's a true modern player, both ways, a freaky edge prospect with a great first step and some physicality. And then as a tight end, he's really more of a jumbo receiver on Friday nights. He's a guy who splits out considerably, athletic enough to where they just throw him bubble screens, but they also throw him the ball down the field as a split out wide receiver 1 type of prospect, again, at 6'4", 220 pounds. So Kylan Fox is incredibly intriguing. I think his ceiling is sky high, especially when he focuses on one side of the ball, something he's really never been able to do, which we assume he'll do there at the next level. So most schools are thinking tight end. Obviously, some heavy hitters there. Florida State has turned things around. Ole Miss offensively is going to have a lot of pass catchers' attention as long as Lane Kiffin is there. Miami just went air raid with their new offensive coordinator hire. Georgia Tech is opening things up a little bit more with Brent Key and Chris Winkie. So this is going to be a pretty hotly contested recruitment to pull him out of his native SEC, ACC country. But there's no doubt that Colorado absolutely has that chance. And if you're a Buffs fan, keep an eye on his official visits. Can you grab one of those final 2 spots before a final decision comes in? And if so, it's game on. And you certainly won't bet against Prime in the 11th hour for any recruit at this point.
Yeah, definitely don't want to bet against Coach Prime in the 11th or even 12th hour, really, because until it's 12 p.m. or whatever the time is, Coach Prime has time. I think the funniest thing before we go about not even Kylan Fox, but like all these top recruits, there'll be a Florida native with a top 5 of Alabama, Georgia, Florida State, and then there's like Colorado. Just like
Yeah.
Colorado, like geographically is basically has been the lone like West team for a lot of these Southern recruits, and I think that just is a testament to how attractive playing for Coach Prime is. And so I think he just needs to kind of continue to be present and then continue to kind of push, because you're not going to get all of them. If you could get all of them, recruiting would be too easy and Colorado would be a national power by next year. But you have to account for the fact that these guys are going to, like, maybe Kylan Fox wants to play closer to home or something like that. So we don't know. I'm just speculating for in general. But some guys, they want to play closer to home. Some don't care. Some want to venture out and be on their own. But just being in the mix is a good thing. And so Colorado continues to be in the mix for Aaron Butler, Kylan Fox, all these guys. And so I think it's a sign of things to come. And I think Colorado will continue to be in the mix for a lot more top recruits. Guys, thank you for making Locked On Buffs your first listen of the day. Thank you for checking us out. Thank you for getting us to 1,000 subscribers. We appreciate you.
Yes.
Make sure to follow us on Spotify or listen on Spotify, Apple Music, wherever you get your podcasts. Share this podcast, share this YouTube. We appreciate you guys, and we'll see you guys tomorrow.
Cheers.